Welcome to About Photography, the podcast, coming to you direct from New York City. And now, here's your host, Ed Farosky.
In this episode, commercial portraiture with Luke Copping. Luke is a beauty, style, and portrait photographer based in Buffalo, New York. We're going to talk to Luke about how he got started with photography, and we're going to get into some of his recent work. Make sure to check out the podcast notes for this episode to learn more about Luke and what he's up to. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
Let's talk about how diverse your portraiture is. I mean, it seems that way to me anyway. I want to know where you get your inspiration from.
It's a funny question. A lot of times people ask me that, expecting for these deep answers. A lot of it just comes from the most simple places. Something as simple as being inspired by colors, like the paint series I did, or even just having an itch to shoot and throwing a series together with a couple friends in the studios on a Saturday night. I mean, if you want to go more in-depth, some of the places I find inspiration from, my portraiture tends to be a little more on the minimalist side. I am really sort of inspired a bit by more minimalist design, minimalist painting, even minimalist film. Going into my own personal likes and dislikes, I don't know how much they really reflect on my work, but, I grew up as a huge nerd. Comic books, foreign films, Japanese horror movies, sci-fi, fantasy. I don't know if those come through in my work as overtly as some of the other things, but they're the things that I enjoy, the things that influence me. I pick ideas up from here and there. One
of the things that attracted me first to your blog was the personal record series. It's almost like note-taking. It's note-taking with an iPhone.
Yeah. I mean, most of what I'm shooting that with is the iPhone, using Instagram a lot, the Fuji X100, just small cameras that I can carry around, I've never been much of a gearhead. It's always been a lot more about just taking the picture for me.
And so when you take these visual notes, and I'm sure a lot of it's just, hey, this looks cool, and, you grab a shot of something. You look back on this stuff, and I'm sure every now and then you kind of look at it and say, why did I take this shot? Why did I take the shot of the hair clippings on the floor of the salon or whatever? Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Exactly.
Was that that was you getting a haircut, right? Or was that? Yeah,
that was me actually, not even at the salon. That was me getting my hair cut by one of my best friends.
Okay. But something in you said, hey, let me get a shot of this. What do you think that was?
I mean, like I said, the personal record came from my desire to create images outside of my professional life. And I can really blame this on my girlfriend, because when we started dating, she complained. It's like the old analogy of if you marry a cook, you're never going to get a good meal.
Right.
She started dating a photographer and then started to complain when I didn't take pictures of us.
Yeah.
I didn't take personal photos. I didn't take family photos. My apartment is incredibly sparse. I don't think I have many photographs in tangible format. I have a lot of paintings around here, a lot of design. Yeah. So she sort of pushed me into just recording little things like that. My day-to-day life, little bits of visual inspiration sort of crept in, but a lot of the stuff in the series is just, me with my friends, my day-to-day life, the people and places I go and see.
Well, I'm sure as you go along and you almost impulsively take a shot of this or that, and it's sort of an ongoing development of your visual aesthetic. As you're taking these shots, you're not under that kind of pressure to produce. You're you've got more of a freedom going, and you can kind of get a sense for what you like, what you see in the world that you like. And
that's exactly right. You can even make the distinction that whereas a lot of my portraiture being so produced is very forethought out, whereas this is photography on a much more instinctual level for me. Even, recently I did a series of just the skyline of Buffalo, New York, walking around as I would walk to get coffee or breakfast in the city, and taking pictures of the tops of buildings. Like I said, it was, split-second decisions. It was very much the diametric opposite of how I normally work, which is, weeks of production and, tons of pre-production casting, styling.
Right. And I have this theory that whatever you shoot for yourself eventually creeps its way into your paid work. The things that you find in your personal work that you really like are going to make their way in there.
Yeah, I've actually been finding more and more lately that the distinction between my professional and personal work is blurring a lot more, to the point where they're becoming much more indistinguishable from one another. Yeah. The styles and intent may change, but visually I'm starting to see that blend even myself.
That's why I always feel it's a little sad when I hear photographers saying, "Well, I'm not going to pick up a camera if I'm not getting paid for it." You know.
Right.
Yeah. So, and it's funny you say the thing about your walls being kind of, I guess you don't have a lot of your own photographs up. You've got other artwork up.
Yeah, I've never been one to surround myself with pictures of my own work. I think it's a combination of the notion of being the self-tormented artist. If I put a picture up on the wall,
Yeah.
because I'm so intimately aware of every flaw that I perceive in it,
Right.
I would constantly want to go back and rework them, which I think to a degree some people do that and it's fine, but I'd much rather move forward onto future projects and grow that way than constantly rework my older work.
I read that your first camera was a Kodak disc camera.
Well, yeah, growing up in Toronto, my brother, who's much older than me, I have one brother, he's 16 years older than me. His name's John. His first wife, her father worked for Kodak Canada. And, them always babysitting me, being in their 20s, me being 5 or 6. There's just always cameras around, their house, or she would always have them. I mean, very much to her growing up with a father working for Kodak, they were like toys. So we'd go to the zoo and she'd give me a camera. Here, Luke, take pictures.
Right.
And so, I don't even know what happened to the camera. I don't even think I had it that long, but it was really the first. Not only was it the first camera, it was really one of the first things I can really remember, like identifying as a possession. Like that was mine. It was my camera. I could take pictures with it, as opposed to the forbidden technology of my father's and my mother's cameras, which were back in the day, I think old Minoltas or old Contaxes.
A lot of professional photographers would not admit to have ever using the Kodak disc camera, though.
You're right, but to me, the tools these days, I mean, even going back to film, it was mechanics and optics and physics.
Yeah.
And that was great. There's a certain science and a craft to photography. And of course, this is, almost 30-year-old me speaking now on the thoughts of a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
But it's, I didn't care. To me, it was about taking a picture. It was about going to this duck pond and taking a picture of a duck. It was about content and forethought. Even so, today, I think that's a lot more important. Yes, there's a certain baseline, expectation of knowing something about the technical side of photography, but I think we've moved into an era where, we've all heard the saying that the barrier to entry to the industry is lowered so much because anyone can buy a good camera. You have to set yourself apart with what you're doing with the tools, not what tools you have.
There's 2 portrait series that caught my eye on your website, and one of them has to do with primary colors, paint, things like that you have on your subject. Give me a little insight into what that's all about.
I was going through a phase of sort of redefining myself as a photographer and trying to make portraiture that was both more personal and at the same time more accessible to a lot of people. I'd been working in hair and beauty and in fashion for a while, bouncing back and forth between Buffalo, which doesn't have a great fashion market, and my work in Toronto, where I'm originally from, which has a fantastic fashion market. So I found myself essentially being 2 different photographers. When I was in Buffalo, I was working mainly for corporate clients, doing headshots for the large medical and health industries we have here. And then I'd jet up to Toronto to shoot a jewelry catalog or a lookbook for a designer. I started sort of consolidating my work as I wanted to move forward with promoting myself more in the US. I was pushed very, very heavily by a consultant I worked with, Amanda Sosa Stone, to really move forward with my personal work a lot more. I'd been hesitant in the past about showing a lot more of the simple, stripped down, simple concept photography that I love, like the Pigment series. Right. So it was a matter of, it was about a week of casting, about 2 days of shooting, kept fun, kept light, working with most of the models in this series are people I know, artists and musicians from Buffalo, other photographers, people sort of in the cultural scene here and then the social and local advocacy scenes here, a couple actors. It wasn't like we went through an agency. This was all just people from my life that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. And in a lot of ways, it was just about their own relations with color and shape. And they were all sort of, with some guidance, styling themselves, putting the paint on themselves in interpreting their ideas on how they wanted to look, and this idea of face painting and war paint. And right. it went in a lot of different directions for people.
There is almost to every portrait that a sense of placement as far as the paint goes.
Yeah, and I think the paint brings out a certain personality and story. I've always sort of liked the idea of emotional ambiguity in my portraits. And I think the way these people are applying the paint, for the most part, they've all got fairly serene, fairly still, almost expressionless faces. And the personality's coming out in how they've put the paint on it. I think, in a way, it does sort of tell a story about them without them having to overact or over-emote or ham it up.
And getting into something a little more, I guess, entertainment-oriented, Lydia Dominic, lifestyle reporter for the NBC affiliate there in Buffalo. I've seen a lot of your shots of her. What was that for?
That was actually just for some personal promotional stuff she does. Lydia's out in the community a lot, both in her role with the news, but also appearing at a lot of local events, stuff with the sports teams, fundraisers, charities, stuff like that. The work she does through the NBC affiliate here. But on top of that, Lydia's also been a good friend of mine for years. I originally worked with her years ago on an editorial article for a magazine I used to co-edit called Auxiliary Magazine. And Lydia had come in sort of just on the first couple of years of her career to work with us as a model for a little style guide we did. And from there on out, we just developed a friendship and have found ourselves sort of working together on various assignments every few months. The work she's done with the NBC affiliate, some spokesmodeling that she's done with some of the larger medical practices here in town, and her own self-promotion and the events that she promotes and the causes that she promotes.
I really like those. There's one that you did. I mean, and they vary. So I guess you're shooting them at different times, and then it wasn't all just like a one-day shoot. Several of these, like there's one where she's kind of got like a backlight, kind of outdoors, very natural sunlit flare thing, and then there's some that are a lot more, I guess, constructed.
Yeah, actually, I think the specific set you're referring to, I think was all shot in a period of about 3 hours.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
it was very much, we've gotten to the point, because of my background coming from production photography and also some light producing I've done, I think it's important to be able to move efficiently through a day, to plan a shoot effectively enough to give yourself the comfort to not be panicking, to be able to move forward and work deliberately and to have time to experiment and improvise on top of getting the necessary images as per the comp or layout that you're working from.
What gear are you using most of the time these days?
It really depends, Ed. There's a right tool for every job. So at my studio, I mainly, if I'm working indoors, either White Lightnings or Pro Photos. If I'm going outside, it might be a generator in Pro Photos or White Lightnings, or it might be on-camera flash, or it might just be me and one of my assistants with a reflector and the sun. I think you have to be a little open to being fluid in how you work. I mean, having a style is great, but sometimes style can be constraining. If you work in such a defined style that you feel like you're taking the same image over and over again, you can take elements of that aesthetic and grow that style. You can work it into different technical situations, different technical factors, and still have that work be uniquely yours. If I'll take, a 5D Mark II or a 1DS or a Hasselblad or an iPhone, whatever you put in my hand, I'm just still going to try and make the best image I can with those tools.
Well, you've got someone like, say, Platon, right, who shoots. Yeah. He's always shooting in the same style. Somebody else can set up his lighting, and because it's always the same, right? His whole setup, and and I'm sure there's variations on this, but in general, that's what he's known for. And then you've got somebody like Mario Testino, right, who every single spread that you see that he does, and you're thinking, wow, that's completely different from the last thing that he shot.
Oh, there's 2 points. I mean, even like if you look at someone like Platon, I think it's more an issue, not so much that they shoot in a very rigid style. He's an exceptional photographer, and I am sure that he can shoot in a multitude of styles. I think it's more a question of editing at that point, and not the shooting or the gear. He's showing work in that style. But I'm sure there's work in other styles. If you look at someone like Terry Richardson a while ago, a guy who was very known for these sort of stark, like direct flash party photos.
Right.
But if you delve a little deeper into some of the stuff he's done editorial-wise, he's a very accomplished photographer, very good at lighting. There's been a couple editorials that are completely outside of the style he normally works in that are just fantastic. So I think editing is an often overlooked element when people consider how someone develops their style.
It's not just what you see, it's what they decide to show.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there could be a whole other facet to their style that most people aren't aware of.
Yeah, completely different bodies of work, completely different styles that they work in. This is just the one they choose to put forward. I think the discussion of editing and even the discussion of gear, photography as an artistic medium and any visual art really is such the important factor that a lot of people overlook is the viewer. We can communicate the idea that we want. We can talk about the technical aspects of photography as much as we want, but for the most part, the viewers and even in a commercial sense, our clients are not concerned with the method that we take to get to the final image, unless they themselves are craftsmen who are interested in the craft. They're concerned with the final image and their response and emotional attachment to it.
Isn't there also that sort of that expectation with some, not necessarily the end client, but maybe someone who's representing the end client in a production shoot? Like, you know that old story where Terry Richardson, speaking of him, he shows up to his first Sports Illustrated assignment with a point and shoot. I think it was that Yashica.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Where's your camera?" And he's saying, "This is my camera. This is what I'm shooting with." And they got really nervous. Yeah. And wouldn't it be fair to say that that would be a consideration for some photographers if they show up with maybe their favorite piece of gear and 50 millimeter lens, and they say, "This is what I like to use," but they're like, "Okay, where's your 5D or whatever?"
And I think that I think you have a point, but let me give you an analogy on the counter side. There's a very similar story about a very different photographer than Terry Richardson. Terry Richardson seems to have this, you either love him or hate him miasma in the industry. Let's talk about somebody like Rodney Smith, and a very, very accomplished photographer with a very distinguished style, who for years, for the most part, works with small cameras, film, natural light, doesn't show up with an enormous crew. Very much similar to that idea of how Richardson works, but in a very different vein of work. Yeah. I'm sure people have had that same reaction to him. I guess what it comes down to, though, is whether you're Rodney Smith or Terry Richardson or Luke Copping or Ed Vorosky, are you delivering? And I'm sure there are some technical waylays to that. If your end use is going to be a building side, plasterboard, then yeah, you might need something with a little more pixel density. But outside of that, that's a technical concern. That's not going to change the emotional resonance of the image.
So which do you prefer, editorial assignments or private commissions?
I guess it would depend on the private commission, but I love editorial because of the freedom it gives you. You can work a little more loose and free. There's certain great things to be said about a commissioned assignment, though, with a client who really believes in you. I've had commercial clients, and maybe this is different sort of coming from shooting like hair and makeup and fashion, as I used to predominantly, where there is a little more, freedom of creativity, and you're working with a very creative, collaborative team of stylists and wardrobe people and designers. Every now and then you get a great client who believes in you and says, "Here's the general idea. We're interested in seeing your interpretation. Maybe get a couple safety shots for us that we know will work, but after that, take some chances."
Tell us why personal projects are so important.
Well, from a couple different facets. I mean, first of all, personal projects from the personal viewpoint. Personal projects and shooting your own work that you believe in is what's going to keep you passionate about this industry. We work in an industry that, by all rights, if you were to judge your life by a purely by a yardstick of financial gain, most anyone would be insane to become a professional photographer. We do this business because we love it, because there's nothing else I would rather do personally. My personal projects let me keep that passion, that freedom. If I have a bad day at work, or I end up having to shoot a catalog of fasteners, just endless screws for 2 months, hypothetically, I'm sure I'd be a little burnt out creatively. Yeah. Shooting those personal projects keeps the juices flowing and keeps you agile. It keeps your creative process running loose and free. You don't become stagnant. You don't become locked into one repetitive action. One of my favorite things about this business is that we're problem solvers and visual communicators. We're not working on assembly lines. We're not into repetitive action. We're into, I like to think of it more as we would be the research and development department.
you talked about how, or you touched on the idea that you've got to show something a little different these days because of the low barrier to entry. That you've got so much competition out there for any type of work. What is, from your perspective, the most important thing a photographer can do to stay competitive?
Well, there's a few things. The barrier to entry is that phrase isn't really a phrase I like. I know I used it earlier, but I hear it thrown around so much by people who are very upset about the industry, who are very upset about the changes in the industry. The barrier to entry is, I guess in its simplest terms, the idea that because the equipment is cheaper, anyone can become or call themselves a photographer. And that's fine. Even back in the film days, though, there were hobbyists. Even back in the film days, there were affluent people who were semi-pro. I just think that these numbers have increased. At the same time, technology has allowed us a rapid workflow. It's allowed us distribution channels that were never open to us before. So these barriers to entry are advantageous to us, too. If you look at the barrier to entry to actually promoting your work from a grassroots level, you now have abilities to show your work to people you never would have before unless you were published. So what it gets back to, the most important things you can do is be true to yourself. You got to have your own vision. You have to work constantly. You have to work harder than anyone else. And that's, I think, the most important factor. But you also can't ignore the other aspects of the industry aside from creating work that are going to set you apart. And that's providing good value to your clients, being a competent business person, taking care of your employees and assistants, taking care of your clients, having great customer service, having a great workflow that, your clients are comfortable with and can work with, being a nice, genuinely entertaining, fun, creative person to work with. It comes down to one of the prime tenets of this business that I've learned is that no one wants to work with an asshole.
And I guess that's what it really comes down to. You listed off lots of different factors in being successful or just being in the game. And most of the things that you listed didn't have anything to do with actually taking pictures.
Right. And I think when you hit a certain level, you see people out there, and I'm sure we all have these opinions of photographers, and they change being that it's so subjective. You might look at someone's work and say, man, how are they getting, the press that they're getting, or how are they getting these jobs? Well, they may be very adept at a different facet of the industry. They may be really, really good at marketing their own work. They may be really, really, really good at getting press releases out and getting press. Things that don't necessarily have to do with photography, but are a huge part of the business of photography.
I get letters about this all the time. Hey, what's your advice? I'm thinking about quitting my job and going pro. There's this glamorous sort of facade to what we do. And then there's the reality of, you're going to work harder than you could have imagined working. Lots of times I tell people, just, if you've got something that pays the bills right now, and you have time to take pictures, you've got it made, Yeah. But it's exactly. Then there are those of us who have decided to strike out on our own, and lots of times you're taking pictures of stuff that you wouldn't have chosen for yourself.
Sure. And I think, everyone goes through those phases too. And that, in a lot of ways, those jobs still come up where you don't get a lot of room to put your own creative style or spin on something like, a really standard like parts catalog, or say like, headshots for ID badges, stuff that a lot of people do when they're starting out, or keep, on the back burner for local sort of bread and butter work. But that's fine. That supports your creative endeavors. Take what you make from that, go out and create yourself a new body of work that you love, that you can go show to people and say, this is what I love shooting. This is what I would love to shoot for you. And then on top of that is the business side of things. One of the best things that I learned that really helped with my business was I'm lucky enough to be in Buffalo, New York, where we have an extremely tight-knit community of professional photographers who help people who came up to the ranks, not just like me, but the people that are coming into the industry now and the people that are going to continue coming into the industry, learn the more esoteric side of the business, insurance, taxes, licensing, and copyright. We're actually very, very lucky. The president of ASMP, American Society of Media Photographers, Jim Kavanaugh, lives about 10 minutes from me. He's been one of my mentors for years in terms of the business side of things. I don't think I'd be where I was today if I didn't have the business acumen that I've developed through working with groups like ASMP, on my time at RIT, and just knowing some really on top of being fantastic photographers, very shrewd business people.
So it's a good idea to network with other people in your industry too, and not just be that lone wolf.
I think so too. I mean, there's always going to be people that have this mentality of, I don't want to share information with the competition. Mm-hmm. But I think at the point we're at in the industry now, sharing of information only serves to benefit all of us. The people complain that with this lowered barrier to entry that amateur photographers are going to come in and steal our jobs. Well, a lot of these amateur photographers are very talented people. Help elevate them. Help them understand what a fair value for their work is. Help them understand how to register and manage their copyrights. Because in the end, it's going to set a precedent in the industry of saying, yes, we are competent business people. We know what we're doing. This is the value of our work. And it's going to be better for everyone in that regard.
Right, absolutely. Give me 3 of your current photography heroes. Who are you really looking at right now?
Well, there's 2 in particular, and I already mentioned one today, mm-hmm. that I keep coming back to, and these were sort of the style. I don't even see much connection between my style and them, but I just love their work. I keep going back to them every day. And the first one is Rodney Smith, who we already talked about.
Right.
Rodney Smith is one of those photographers that when I first saw his work, it made me fall in love with photography. That's when I sort of set out and said, I just really dig what this guy is doing. I like how he's telling his own stories, and I want to do that too. Now, the other guy is Nick Knight. And going back in the fashion field, even going back to his more documentary type stuff, I don't think there's anyone who's pushed the industry and both the aesthetics and science of photography as far as he has in the way he works with color and the way he worked with process through the film days and the way he's working, with his treatments now. I am absolutely fascinated by his work, from his black and white stuff all the way up through his flora stuff. And then the third choice, I guess that's tricky. I guess I'll throw somebody out there who is newer. His name's Angus Rowe McPherson. He's a guy in Toronto, does commercial work, but has this really wonderful aesthetic that he works with. There's a couple projects specifically going back. There's like an English sports physique, like a sort of old country sports editorial he did. It was fishing and golf from a really fashionable sense, really interestingly done. Really just wonderful eye for composition and color. Really tells great stories with his work. He's sort of always been on the peripheral of the people whose work I follow. Like every now and then I just pop past his site and like, wow, I just love this guy's work. I just love what he's doing. And he's not one of those he's not like one of those names. He's not out there like a La Chapelle or like a Mark Seliger. But I have this fantastic love for his imagery.
I like how you can appreciate both sides of this. You can appreciate the very clean finished image, and then you've got your other side, and your personal record stuff and the stuff that you shoot for yourself, where it's just, hey, yeah, I'm just taking a shot and then just running it through Instagram or whatever. Or,
sure. And I think there is something very appealing, especially in sort of the visual syntax of the world we live in now, about imperfection. Mm-hmm. I've done fashion stuff and like beauty portraits where I've had to make people, flawless, perfect skin, whatever. I still think that some of the most interesting stuff that I love shooting is stuff like the Dirt Project, where I can photograph someone and, show their flaws. I can show what makes them interesting and have, a little bit more character of their face. Even with the Instagram stuff, there's something really appealing about the nature of the applied filters and the randomness of, how sharp your focus is going to end up being with that iPhone lens.
I really love the way that you speak about the craft, and the art of photography. A lot of the people listening to this just really want to do, I guess their best work,
Yeah.
So what can you leave us with in terms of finding your best work?
I think that the keys to finding your best work are first having a good understanding of yourself, or barring that, a willingness to explore yourself, to be honest about what it is that you like, what appeals to you about a person or a subject that you're photographing. I think you have to let yourself, you have to walk a fine line. I think you have to fall in love with what you're shooting a little bit, but also be critical enough to be your own worst critic. I have this little joke with a group of my friends around here, that if I ever take what I consider to be a perfect photo, is the day I'll quit photography. You have to constantly be chasing that idea of growth. If you find yourself sitting there day after day editing photos and just loving everything you take, saying, this is the best picture I've ever taken, this is the best picture I've ever taken, you're not trying hard enough. You need to go back and you need to find, what can I do to make better? Yes, this is a good photo, but what am I going to see in this that the viewer might not necessarily see? What can I do to make this even better? You've got to push yourself, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to bring a lot of yourself to your work. I think that's why personal work resonates so much with viewers and buyers, is because when you bring more of yourself to your work, you're sharing more of yourself with them. There's more connection. There's more ability to be emotionally vested in an image from both the creator's side and from the viewer's side. And I think you have to take that passion and put it into your work ethic, into your business, into how you're marketing yourself, how you're creating images, even how you're helping other people, how you're sharing your information with other photographers, how you're helping to educate assistants and interns, how you are collaborating with your peers and the people working on your level to push them as much as you push yourself, and they'll push you back.
Luke Copping, thanks for taking the time to share your insight with us today.
Sure, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Examples of Luke's work, as well as links to his website and blog, can be found on the podcast notes for this episode at aboutphotographypodcast.com.
Thanks for listening to About Photography with Ed Vorosky. Check out our website at aboutphotography.com. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter. Until next time, have a great day. Now go out and take some pictures.